he has a new television series, documentary actually, on Tucker TV. It's called All the President's Men, The Conspiracy Against Trump. Very interesting. Hi, Sean. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Fine. Thank you very much. First, before we talk about your new work, I like you to talk a little bit about your interest into acting, then directing. Of course, I know you started early as a child, and your father, the great Oliver Stone films. I think I've seen all of his films as well. I spotted you as well. So tell us about this experience.
Uh, well, I always saw acting as a kid as just sort of the way my father put it, almost like home videos, just being available to dress up and go do a couple of days of work. It was never for me. It was never like a passion of mine to become an actor. I was enjoying the experience of being on sets, the immersion into these worlds that are created so fully, 360 degrees of dressing and hundreds of people working to create what you see for a few seconds on camera. I always found it very magical, and I loved just being on sets as a kid. Traveling, we would go to places, obviously New York for Wall Street, or Dallas for talk radio and Born, and JFK, and then Philippines and Thailand for the Vietnam films. And so it was a real special life to grow up in that way.
Yes, but right now, I remember going to see in Cairo Festival Natural Born Killers when it was new, it was released, and your father came to promote it in Cairo Festival when it was brand new. Did you come with him, or did you visit Egypt before?
I've been to Egypt. I didn't go when I was 9 years old. I think the film came out, I was still 9 years old. I was in the film as
Yes,
just a cameo as the little brother with Juliette Lewis, and in the family scene with Rodney Dangerfield. It was my father, played my father. So I was in the film briefly, and I saw the film, but I did not go to Cairo then. I went to Cairo actually on a trip to Egypt in 2018. We went to the pyramids, basically went up the Nile, visited uh, so many of the temples,
yes,
and it was amazing. It was an amazing trip.
yes. You know, I remember your father when he came. He did a conference in Cairo Festival. And at the time, the president of the festival was Saad Wahba, and he used to tell us he went to meet Oliver Stone in the airport, and then he was interviewed after he met him, and this is what he say. He say Oliver Stone asked him, "Do you have nice hotel? Do you have I mean hot water and stuff like that?" And it was his first visit to Egypt, you know, and he was amazed by Egypt, you know, and he says, as always, commenting on the American media that he didn't know that Egypt is that, you know, I mean, progressive and it's like a cosmopolitan country or cosmopolitan state. And he says that all the time that. The media, you know, reflects different stuff about different countries, and of course, your father, you know, had his work. He started as a screenwriter. You know, he wrote many political and social commentary. I love, by the way, his first film, The Hand, with Michael Caine. If you remember it, I love it. By the way, I saw it on video VHS. I think I was young to go to the cinema to see it. I saw it when it was released later. But tell me, I've seen, Sean, that you started as an actor, not after you appeared in cameos and as a child, as a teen in your father films. You started to do some acting. You did a lot of different genres. Tell me a little bit about your so far acting career, and when did you decide to helm your own work? When this decision came on your thoughts, and what did you do to start to helm your own work as a filmmaker?
Hmm, sure. So again, as I mentioned, I was acting as a kid. In films, the JFK, Natural Born Killers, The Doors, Wall Street, but it was very small roles. So as I said, I didn't see myself so much as an actor. I was more interested in being immersed in that world. I loved storytelling. I was writing my first scripts when I was still in high school, and
Yeah.
my first films that I directed were actually the behind the scenes for Alexander. I went
Yes.
to be part of that shoot. I took a semester away from college. I went to shoot the behind the scenes back when the DVDs, had the special features, right? The special feature
Uh-huh.
documentaries and all those. They don't even have DVDs hardly anymore, right? But back then it was kind of a good market. So I got in there and did the behind the scenes for Alexander. I made my first feature length documentary called Fight Against Time, which is now I think it's on YouTube. People can watch it there. But I did basically a number of short documentaries, like 30 minutes for the DVD in America. I then continued after college to work on W, my dad's film. I was doing behind the scenes again for W, also for Nixon. They released another DVD for Nixon, and I put out a 30-minute documentary with that. So I was doing a number of those things, and then I started working in the editing room with my father on W, on Untold History of the United States, his 10-part documentary series. So I was working in the editing room, and then I shifted to do my first feature film, which was a documentary style horror thriller called Greystone Park. People that saw the new Bob Dylan movie, actually the opening, they go to Greystone. It was a very famous mental hospital in Jersey. And so it was abandoned when we went to explore it in the 2011 time period. That's when we were ghost hunting and exploring this place. We made a feature film that came out in 2012, came out on Netflix and a number of other. We got some distribution globally as well. So I don't know if it's available in Egypt or not, but anyway, that was my first directing gig, and then I went into doing hosting. I did a number of things like hosting shows like Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura, Buzzsaw for Gaia, watching the Hawks for RT America, and simultaneously directing a number of documentaries, including about 3 documentaries for RT America, and then just continuing to make things, write scripts, and yeah, I mean everyone is a challenge to get out. So you just trust the process, and sometimes you get lucky and you get something made.
Speaking about documentary style, most of your father work as well incorporated documentary footage, and sometimes they are intercut with. He used to love to shoot black and white, sometimes 60 millimeter, sometimes I don't know other type of camera other than he originally shoot the film with, and he incorporated to bring, a cine variété, like they say in French, in his film. And do you think you got influenced a little bit by Oliver Stone's style? I mean, in shaping your own vision into your own films. Hello, Sean. Yes, we are on.
I lost
Yes,
you there.
sorry.
I can hear
Yes,
you now.
yes, yes. I was asking you about your style, your own style. You think, beginning as a filmmaker, you got influenced by Oliver Stone's style? I mean,
Sure.
incorporating some documentary footage and sometimes 16 millimeter videos in his film to incorporate cine verite style in his own films.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that he is sort of remember he transitioned in the 2000s to documentary. So
Yes,
since that time, since 2000, he's actually made more documentaries than feature films. And I
yes,
think natural progression, well, not progression, but it's a natural step for him because, as you said,
yes,
he was already incorporating that style, but also just his interest is very contemporary, right? So the films that he
yes,
was making in the 80s and 90s were reflections on the stories that he lived and was part of in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? The Vietnam era, the protests, the Wall Street. I think if he had had a camera earlier on, he might have been doing documentaries, from the 60s, right? He might have been
for
doing
sure.
documentaries in Vietnam, but
Yes,
technology became easier, right? Documentaries are not a big deal as much because, um, again, the nature of digital technology, the size of the cameras, what could be told through documentary approaches, I think got more it got easier, got more acceptable in the 90s into the 2000s. So he transitioned to be able to tell things like Persona non grata, where I was with him. We would go to the Middle East to talk to people from Hamas and Al Aqsa and Arafat, and then Netanyahu and Ehud Barak and others. And he made a very nice
yes,
documentary about the conflict, and then we went to talk to Castro, and he made Comandante, and a number of other. He went to did the south of the border about Chavez and those guys. He did the Putin interviews. So again, I think that he realized, like, because of the access and the urgency of some of these stories, that he wanted to get there and actually just do it as a documentary. So yeah, I think that his style informed me from a young age, and at the same time I was working, I was basically behind the scenes, and then I was also seeing him doing both features and documentaries and being part of that process. So those experiences lent themselves to my approach, I think, as a storyteller, to a certain degree.
yes. And I think right now, speaking of technology and streaming networks, I mean, documentaries are more accessible right now for viewers.
Hmm.
Before, we used to see them on television, in festivals, but right now I can look for a documentary and see it at home
Hmm.
easier, you
Hmm.
know. And I think this will help as well people to be interested in documentaries and in reality, not reality show, but I mean important documentaries.
Hmm.
And this will lead us to, to the new series, All the President's Men, the conspiracy against Trump. Tell me, why did you think you should tell this premise in a series? Why it was so juicy to present it in, a
Yeah.
series of episode, not a documentary film?
you know, it was originally supposed to be a documentary.
Yeah.
I was approached by Igor Lapatinok, who did a very good documentary called Ukraine on Fire, and then a sequel to that. Well, the Ukraine on Fire was a pretty big success. I think a lot of people have seen it. It shows you about the alternate, the story from the mainstream media. Ukraine. What was it? There was another one that Netflix did about the white hats and all the pro-Ukraine revolution Maidan stuff. And Igor, who's also Ukrainian, with my dad, did this documentary showing the other side, the idea that this was more of a State Department CIA coup that we're fomenting in Ukraine and creating a very dangerous situation, that led to the war, obviously, in 2022. So Igor had done some work with my father. He wanted to do a documentary about the Russia Gate, essentially the people that were caught up in the Russia Gate story, and that included George Papadopoulos, Roger Stone, General Flynn. Rudy Giuliani was more later. He came later. He was more about the Ukraine Gate. Remember when they tried to impeach Trump for the phone call to Zelensky, and that became after Russiagate, that became Ukrainegate, basically. So we wanted to talk to Giuliani, we wanted to talk to Kash Patel and Carter Page, and I think that eventually, I don't know how, actually Igor decided it was more of a producing decision, and I think it made sense because really there is such a big story to tell here, that we would do a series where one speaker would be the focus of each episode, and that was more of Igor's decision as the producer to say, we have the budget, let's do a series instead of just doing a movie, which I could have done a movie, but I think it made sense because of the scope of what we're telling. And I think as you watch the series, which is 6 episodes, but it's about 8 hours long, right? You realize that there's just so much information that it probably would have been too much to put into one 2-hour movie.
Tell me a little bit and also about the viewers. Right now, the series is on Tucker. I imagine it's the whole episodes are there, like they are released, like Netflix, as a single presentation. Tell me about the characters you interviewed and also the feedback so far, because I've seen your interview on several YouTube shows here, online, and also the series started to get reviewed. So tell us a little bit about the interviewees and what people can learn from watching the series.
Sure. I mean, what can they learn? They can learn. They can learn a lot because, this series, as I mentioned, it started with the investigation into Russiagate.
Mm-hmm.
And as people recall, was very much a conspiracy, and I think that's really what they'll learn is how it's a conspiracy to create the illusion that Trump was an agent of Russia, right? Which for years the Democrats were screaming was, including Schiff, this guy Schiff in the Senate now, who should have been ousted and he should be, pretty much, kicked out of Congress for all the lies that he was spreading. But basically the idea that Trump being a Russian agent was more a conspiracy of our FBI, our CIA, and you, thankfully, because of there was a report that came out a few years ago now called the Durham Report. So we used a lot of information from that, basically corroborate the information that you see in the series. So it's not like we're just saying this and our speakers are saying this. We're going to the Durham Report, which was the special counsel investigation into the original Russiagate, basically explaining how this was a very flimsy investigation. The FBI should never have started in the first place to target the campaign of Trump, the advisors of Trump. There was not enough evidence, basically, for them to start this in the first place. So by showing this the series, you understand that it's very much a conspiracy story. That's why we call it the conspiracy against Trump, of a network you can call the deep state, but essentially it's very close, people very close to the Clinton Foundation, and the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation, right? All of these people inside of FBI, inside of DOJ, in the intelligence community, that are basically working to promote a theory that Trump is a Russian agent, so he's an illegitimate president. And that conspiracy then continued when they couldn't prove there was a Russian connection to Trump's election in 2016. They then tried to impeach him, as I said, for him inquiring into the Biden family's corruption in Ukraine. That became the first impeachment of Trump, if people remember. It was Trump trying to talk to Zelensky, say, hey, I hear that the Bidens we're doing some business, and Joe Biden got this prosecutor fired. Can you look into this? Joe Biden had the prosecutor in Ukraine fired because his son's company was corrupt, right? And his son was on the board getting money. So it's like we go from that to that, and then there's the Ukraine. So there's an impeachment which doesn't go anywhere against Trump, but then after the impeachment, there's 2020, the election, which we point out a lot of the indications that the 2020 election was fraudulent or rigged. We point to that, and then we go into 2021, January 6th. Actually, we talk about how that event was, as we've learned more and more, right? That there were a lot of FBI agents that were there and informants. That it was very much not the way that people think it was. It was basically Pelosi and company knew they basically refused the National Guard and all the protection that Trump had basically said, yeah, make sure that the Capitol is secure. And it seems that they allowed people into the Capitol, or at least did not secure it. And so they left the door open, essentially, in some cases, literally, to allow these protesters in, and to then say it was, like 9/11, of an event like 9/11, which was total hyperbole. So again, I think if you watch the series, you understand there's a certain ideology that we saw at work all the way until recently. I think it's still playing out. Some of these Democrats are still screaming, like Liz Cheney and company, that that Trump should not be allowed to be president. I guess he just got certified, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. But they will do their best to try to undermine him and what he's representing. But I think if you see the series, you understand that he represents a much more rational foreign policy, right? Working with Russia, working to basically make peace, in regions like Ukraine, and then hopefully in the Middle East. I think that he's ultimately a peacemaker, and we show that the people that are opposed to him, like Dick Cheney, who supported Kamala, are warmongers. They're neocon warmongers who destabilize countries like Libya and Iraq and Syria, and that's their agenda. And he does. I don't think he represents that.
I discovered the term deep state in Egypt in 2011 when there was an uprising in Mubarak. We say it in Arabic as well. Started to be in the media.
Yeah.
And I wasn't into politics, but when your country facing these kind of challenges, you start to follow the news more, to have your opinion about things, to try to go to election, because my generation, they used not to go to elections because Mubarak came when I was 10 years old. 81, and we know he will gain the election, yeah, all the time. So we didn't go to elections,
Yeah.
and right now I see the term deep state in all the not only YouTube but the mainstream media in the United States. So tell me, what does it mean according to you, and as well in the context of the documentary as well?
Yeah, the deep state means, so there's a permanent bureaucracy, you could say, in the United States. The deep state indicates more of the personnel that are entrenched in the organs of government that do not get elected, right? So the president serves for maybe 4 years, maybe 8 years at most. Congress people are much longer serving. Actually, there's no term limits on them, so they can essentially become more readily part of it. But I think usually they're blackmailed by it, or they are in bed with it. So the deep state is more a reference to the military industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about. That's expanded from military industrial to include medical, the scientific people like Fauci, who are there for 40 years or 40 plus years. And then basically then this revolving door between national security people, CIA, FBI, Pentagon, and then the private sector that they work with. So they'll go from Dick Cheney types, they go from Halliburton, to then working for the Cheney was Secretary of Defense, and things he had worked in the government. Then he would go to the private sector, right? Then he would go back to the government. And along the way, they have relationships that they build, and they're supporting essentially to, you name it. It could be personal. They could be personally making money from maybe their family members are making money, or they could be helping their buddies so that when they come out of government, then they have a job waiting for them. And essentially, again, this deep state is essentially a permanent bureaucracy that's committed to a globalist agenda. Globalist agenda meaning permanent alliances like NATO, things like the Paris Climate Accords, things that are basically disempowering America as a sovereign country, putting us within an umbrella of global institutions, right? And because a lot of the corporations that these government officials are in bed with or working with are very global. And so their interest is not necessarily the benefit of the American people. Their interest is in power and control on a global scale. And yeah, what we've seen certainly across the decades is a certain ideology within the power elite of on a war front. I mean, that's obvious. Overthrowing countries that get in our way. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs has been very eloquent, actually, with his interviews with Tucker Carlson. I think are very good to explain a lot of this and how they, if any, rather than going back, really to the beginning of the CIA in like Iran or Guatemala, rather than saying, okay, there's a country that's maybe not fully in alignment with our policies. Let's negotiate. Let's work out a deal. Our attitude is, well, let's go overthrow them. And we've done that for decades, whether it's rigging elections, whether it's overthrowing them with coups, whether it's, if that coups don't work, starting wars against them, destabilization, right? So we see this. I mean, as I mentioned, Libya, Syria, Iraq are three examples of destabilizations that have worked. Syria most recently. And so that's very much an agenda that doesn't represent the constitutional interpretation, let's say, of like George Washington and the founders, who said America should be very limited in its entangling alliances and, shouldn't be seeking out to overthrow, foreign adventures, basically, to start wars or to overthrow. We should be more focused on our country and hopefully, making fair deals, fair trade deals, things like this, negotiating. But we've got this since World War II. We've become sort of, in many ways, the bully of the world. And we know that we can go and, basically knock out anyone that doesn't agree with us. And I think this whole system is now in flux. It's changing.
Oh, good, you're here. I need your help.
It's changing because we obviously are seeing the BRICS alliances in the East, and obviously it's expanding. The BRICS alliances now are looking at upward of 30 countries. You're seeing, huge economic shifts that will follow. So I would say the deep state is in a crisis moment in terms of this notion of, unipolar world. America can dictate the terms. And I think, this is really why you could say that the support that Trump got in this election reflects a lot of people waking up to this idea that, no, we don't want to be the bully of the world anymore. We want to, have a strong focus on strengthening America, but not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily include going around and trying to overthrow governments in the process and creating more enemies than we need.
Yes. Do you think right now a series like yours, I want to ask you as well, why did you choose All the President's Men? Of course, it was a similar title to Alan J. Pakula film, with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah.
Why did you try to choose this title as well? Do you think right now, through a series like yours and through YouTube and the streaming media, the American people, I mean, they are more accessible to know about international politics, about the involvement of their country, about, they are more, I mean, aware and active, regarding politics, regarding elections. Because for me as a foreigner, I'm into more American politics. I see the debates, I read the news, I hear a lot of political commentaries, even from Europe about America. For instance, I follow Russell Brand on YouTube and on Rumble as well.
Sure.
A lot of commentaries in the French media as well. So tell us about the title of the series. Why did you choose it like that? And also about what do you think of the American people? Because before, the young people used not to know anything about international politics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I obviously we're in a more global world. To answer the second question, we're in a more global world, so people are much more connected and aware of things going on globally, just because it's on their social media and TikTok videos. So you can, maybe in the 90s when we bombed countries like Iraq, or you had maybe up to 500,000. What did they say? 500,000 or so or more. People dying in Iraq from sanctions, and children dying from sanctions, and you had bombings in countries like Kosovo and Serbia. Even during the Iraq War, there was less footage such that was available to us to see the consequence of war. Now, really you can just open your TikTok and you can see the devastation in Gaza, for example, from that war, right? So I would say that we are waking up to we've always been at some level awake to the consequence of war. I think the American people did largely turn against the Vietnam War and felt ashamed and embarrassed and saddened by it, obviously. But we are now more viscerally aware of a global world because of, thankfully, I think, the positive sides of the internet, the positive sides of YouTube videos and TikTok videos and things like this. Despite the censorship, by the way, yes, there has been censorship, we know. And Google is one of the worst, actually, censors of information. I always tell people, stay away from Google, because that's like CIA. And actually, there's some interesting articles about Google's origins being connected to maybe CIA, In-Q-Tel, which was the investment arm. And maybe it really is serving the CIA agenda, because historically we've seen Google is using its algorithms and its search engine optimization to suppress a lot of information, right? It's not a real free market of information. But as far as my documentary, the name All the President's Men just made sense, because if you understand the coup against Nixon, which my dad, made Nixon about the downfall of Nixon. He didn't get too much into the conspiracy. There's been a lot of good books and research done about the conspiracy, showing that there's probably more factors involved in how Nixon was taken down through this weird Watergate story. Because there were like four break-ins to the Watergate by these plumbers, and to this day, no one can tell you exactly what they were looking for or who ordered it. So there's a real weirdness around the Watergate break-ins. Nixon, of course, he was a politician. He was corrupt to an extent, like all politicians are, but he wasn't worse, necessarily than the others. So to me, it was a takedown. But All the President's Men was the name of the book, because they went after Nixon one by one by going after the people around him. So they went after, his who was it, Ehrlichman and Haldeman, all of his advisors, essentially, and Mitchell, who had been his lawyer and was his, head of his campaign. So it was like they would go one by one, right? To take out the president, you have to get the people who are like the gatekeepers, right? The people close to him. So I said, okay, it's a good sort of interesting parallel, because the conspiracy against Trump was to, again, take out the people around him, which they couldn't successfully do, because they took out people that were not necessarily that close. And I think they installed others that were, maybe people like, John Bolton, right, who were neocons. And so they were able to manipulate his presidency in the first time around much more than this one. But the idea of the conspiracy against Trump being going after the advisors, so that you can start to paint this picture. Oh, we've got George Papadopoulos, who's a foreign policy guy, and we've got Carter Page, who's a foreign policy guy, and we've got Roger Stone, who's an old friend of him. So all these people that were sort of part of the Trump campaign, let's say, and if you can paint them as Russian agents or assets, then you get this conspiracy that it metastasizes, as you'd say, right? It grows. And in this case, they were not able to successfully prove the conspiracy, as they could with Nixon, that there was a cover-up of the Watergate break-ins. This one was not a provable conspiracy, so it did not succeed. But certainly the intention of how to do the coup, to me, was very similar.
Sean, right now, you are preparing other projects in the coming period?
Yes, of course.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about it, or still in the making?
In the making, I would say in the works. So,
documentaries or feature narrative?
Both.
Both, really? This is great.
Yeah,
great.
so I prefer to
Sean,
we're further along.
Sean, I think we met in Kazan Festival or not.
And Kazan, yeah, that would make sense. In Kazan.
I've been there in Kazan. You've been there before?
Yes, the Kazan Film Festival. Yes.
Hello? Yes. Yeah. Yes, yes, we met. I was jury at that year. I remember right now.
Yeah,
Five
that makes.
years ago. This is
Yeah.
great. Okay, Sean, I want to thank you very much for the. Mhm. Yes, I want to thank you very much for the live with you. I wish you all the best in promoting all the President's Men currently on Tucker. And I look forward for your next projects as well. And say hi to Oliver Stone from our side here, you know.
Thank you.
And it was great talking to you and have some insights on your career and your father career, his your influences, and right now I see you are following footsteps into becoming a great filmmaker like him.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Have a lovely day. Take care.
You too.
Bye bye.